Right, in this example, we have someone who visited 6 supermarkets in one day to stockpile some toilet rolls. So we need to create an algorithm that asks the user to input the number of toilet rolls they bought at each supermarket. So because it says 6 supermarkets, we need to use a for loop that loops 6 times. But before that, we need to do a few other things because we need to do some calculations. It says calculate the total amount spent on toilet rolls. So we need to create a variable called total and set it to 0. And then we also need to display the highest amount paid for a single toilet roll and the lowest amount paid. So to find the highest and lowest amounts, what we need to do is we need to create a variable called highest and set it to 0. And then we need to create a variable called lowest and set it to any number that is very, very high. So we will be using this later on, and I'll explain it in more details later on, and why we use them in to find the highest and lowest, and why highest is 0 and lowest is that, because obviously 0 is not very high. So then it says, so now we need to create our for loop. So for x in range from 1 to 7, 1 to 7 means we're looping from 1 up to 6 times in total. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It will not reach 7. Now the reason I didn't just put 6 in here is because we want to use that store number. Now for the next part, amount, this is when we ask how many toilet rolls did they use in that specific supermarket. So we say how many did you buy in this supermarket, and then we do plus x. Now x is going to be the number which starts from 1. So if you look here on the right side in blue, it says how many did you buy in supermarket 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's where we use this part of the code. So str, we're just forcing x into a string because you cannot add an integer. So because the number 1 was an integer, you cannot add an integer to a string. We cannot concatenate like that. We have to make it a string. So number 1 will just be changed into a string in here. Then what we need to do is we need to create an if statement. Now if the amount is greater than 0, because that was in the question, if they entered 1 or above, then ask how much each toilet roll cost. So we need to create an if statement. If the amount is greater than 0, then we ask them for the cost. Because if they didn't buy anything, then there is no point asking them for the cost. If they went to that specific store and there was nothing there, then we're not going to ask them anything. So if we ask them for cost, if the amount is greater than 1, so they bought at least 1, then what we need to do is we need to create a total variable. So we do total is equal to total plus the cost times amount. Now, cost times amount is because if they bought 5 in that specific store, then we need to add that to the total because this one says how much did each toilet roll cost. So we need to find the total amount he paid in that specific store. Then we need to create another if statement to find which one is the highest or not, or which one is the lowest. Now, what you do to find the highest is you create an if statement. So if the cost is greater than highest, so if the cost is greater than 0, then we need to set the highest to the cost. So highest will be equals to the cost. Now the highest, once it says to the cost, so let's say they picked £4 as the highest, then once the for loop goes back to the start and repeats, the highest will be set to 4. Then it will compare the cost with the highest again. So so let's say if the new item is 5, so if the new item is £5 and the highest was 4 from the first store, then the highest will be set to cost, which means the highest will be the new cost, highest will be 5, and so on. So it will keep updating depending on the highest number or lowest number. Then we need to create another if statement. We cannot do elif in here. We have to create another if statement. So if the cost is lower than lowest, so if the cost, so let's say £3, is less than the very big number, then we need to set the lowest to cost. Now, once the lowest is set to the first cost from the first try, from the first amount, then it will keep a running total. So, for example, if the first item bought was 3, then lowest will be set to 3, and also highest will be set to 3. Then in the second try, if the highest was 4, then that 3 will change to 4 in the highest, but that 3 will not change to 4 for the lowest, because we're saying if the cost is less than. So if 4 is less than 3, that's not true. So this if statement will not run at all. And that's one way of calculating the highest or the lowest. Then all we do is we need to print out the total amount left in the full sentence, and we also need to display the highest amount and the lowest amount all in full sentences. And that's your final program. So when you run it, it says how many did you buy in the supermarket. So let's say 3 to just add random numbers. So you see that it says total amount spent 467, highest amount spent 6, lowest amount spent is 1.